good morning, or I should probably say good afternoon, but we will get to that in a minute. I'm Callie. This is my YouTube channel, Calmeister, and I decided that this November I would finally get around to the reread of the Luner Chronicles that I've been meaning to get to for eons. I feel though that this does require a bit of background in order to talk about why I'm even doing this in the first place, because a lot of you don't know me and will obviously not know my relationship to these books, and even those of you who do know me would also not know how these books have impacted me. So for a little bit of background, I was 14 the first time I read Cinder. Set the scene. It was 2014. I'm a freshman in high school. I meet this girl. She's new at my school. It's a K through 12 school, so new kids are a big deal. And she's outgoing, she's funny, she's talented, and she's an avid reader. She's in my English class, and at the time, I'm a reader, but I'm not a reader the way this girl's a reader, right? She's read everything under the sun. So naturally, me always finding myself in a reading slump after I've read the 4 library books I've allowed myself that year, I went to her and I was like, oh my God, what books do you recommend? Because I wanted to be cool and whimsical like her. And she goes, Callie, I've read so many books. You're going to need to give me way more specifics. What do you actually like to read? And me being a freshman in high school, I had very little knowledge of my own identity and my own taste. And so I kind of just told her to compile a list with a bunch of different genres and tastes, and I can kind of figure out what I want to read from there. I gave her some parameters. Okay, I did know what I didn't like. And I told her I don't like love triangles. I had decided at the time I didn't like The Hunger Games and that I didn't like Twilight simply because they were popular. I really had this stick up my ass. If something was popular, I didn't like it on principle. I had started so many series at that point where I had quit around the second book because I hated the love triangle. Told her no love triangles, and she said heard. And I told her I like science fiction, and she said heard. And she gave me this list, and on this list, the title that completely drew my attention from the jump was the Luner Chronicles. I was a little hesitant because I'm not really particular to a fairy tale retelling, but the main character's a cyborg and there's people from the moon. Yeah, okay, sign me up. I like weird spacey shit. Give it to me. And so I told her that this was the one I wanted to read first, and she goes, oh my God, I own the books. And I went, own them? Because also at the time, I didn't own a single book. I owned a couple my summer reading books, and I had earned some books through library reading programs, that their summer reading programs that they do, but I hadn't actually gone up to the bookstore and purchased a book. I usually would go to Barnes & Noble, look at books, smell books, and then leave, and then I would get whatever interested me at Barnes & Noble. I would put it on hold at the library. I was a big library girl. I still am, but I the concept of owning your own in-home library was completely foreign to me. I was the only people who can do that are rich because they A, need the space to store them, and B, $20 for a hardback? Girl, only the rich can buy that. It blew my mind. She's like, but I own them. And so she borrowed the books to me. I had all these rules on keeping them pristine, very cute. I wasn't even allowed to use the sleeve of the book as a bookmark. And me being a library girly, I knew how to take care of a book. So I did my best at the time. I read through the series. I plowed through it, and the books immediately latched onto me. The biggest reason I remember latching onto these books was Cinder, the character, the cyborg Cinderella. I found a lot of my own personality and my own tendencies really reflected in her as a character. She's a bit more stoic. She doesn't have tear ducts. I remember her distinctly not having any tear ducts, so she never could express her feelings or her emotions. So she felt really stilted in that way. And as somebody who did feel too much when I had big feelings, I tended to hide them away as well. So I found some relatability in that. She was taller than her sisters, and she felt awkward and clunky and boyish in comparison to women around her, which is something I really, really related to at the time because I was an athlete. I was taller than all my friends, and I just never felt feminine enough. Also, Cinder doesn't prioritize the prince and this big crush. It's very starstruck, very Ella Enchanted, he's just the prince. All the other girls are obsessed with him. I got better things to do. She was a mechanic, which I thought was cool. She could work with her hands, didn't mind getting dirty. Her hair didn't perform perfectly. She always wore a ponytail, which as an athlete, I wore a ponytail 24/7 my whole life. I was more brash and pragmatic when I approached problems and less emotional. And I saw a lot of myself in Cinder's characterization. And so reading this book, I immediately latched onto this character because she is all of those things that I thought were wrong with me. I didn't have to read about a tiny, perfect, feminine girl getting romanced by hot man. I finally got to read about a girl that was awkward and like pragmatic and a bit boyish and not super girly, but still wanting to be seen as a woman, seen as feminine. The series took off after that. There's lots of things I liked about it. There's, male-female friendship in it that is really, from what I can remember, it was pretty wholesome. Every single character, is paired up in a different type of relationship. They all have their own dynamic, but they all get to fall in love, right? Which is always cute. I'm going to show my hand a little bit. I have started rereading. I forgot about the age gaps that are a little bit awkward and weird to me that I'm recalling. Cinder is 16, but her love interest Kai is almost 19. She meets Thorn in book 2. Thorn is 20 while she's 16. Having been 20 years old, it would be weird to be friends with a 16-year-old. But at the same time, my sister was 16 when I was 20. We were friends the way sisters are. But anywho, there's a few things I can come up with out of my head that maybe aren't perfect, and I didn't read it with a critical eye way back when I read it for the first time. And so reading it now as an adult, I'm probably going to see a lot of more of these like issues. It's probably going to feel very young, and I don't think the series is perfect, but it shaped a lot of who I am today. Because while reading Cinder and her perspective changed my brain chemistry as a 15-year-old, another part of this book series that changed a bit of my brain chemistry was Winter. The final book of the series came out on November 10th, 2015. Why do I remember that? Oh, because it's 2 days after my 16th birthday. So I felt like Marissa Meyer herself personally put that book out for me. I was insufferable about it. I was like, oh my God, it's coming out right around my birthday. That's so special. I wasn't dropping hints, okay? Because I thought that owning a book was it was a foreign concept to me. I was excited to put my hold in at the library. I was updating my library page every single day to see when I was allowed to put a hold out for this book. I was so excited. I think I put a hold on it on November 10th when it came out, right? And cut to my 16th birthday celebration. I'm having all my friends over at my house. And I always had my birthday celebrations, because I'm a November baby. I don't know if obviously birthday celebrations a week after my birthday, but a week before Thanksgiving. There's always a week between my birthday and Thanksgiving, or 2. Sometimes it's 2 weeks depending on the calendar, where I didn't have soccer and it wasn't the holidays yet. Usually it was the first weekend of Thanksgiving break and whatever. It wasn't anything too special. I was poor, so we didn't have a big party or anything. And my parents were there, but I had all my friends over, and the friend who had borrowed me her whole series had purchased the book Winter for me for my birthday. And I kid you not, I had not conceptualized that you could give books as gifts. Again, I didn't think that owning them was a normal thing people did. I thought that everybody went to the library because that's what I did, right? I had a very narrow view of the world, and she bought me this book and I nearly cried. I almost ended my birthday party right there so I could read it. I felt seen. I felt like a piece of myself, because I'd always been a reader, but none of my friends have been avid readers until I made this friend. And I felt like she had listened to something that I wanted genuinely and gone out of her way and purchased something so big and so expensive for me. Looking back, it is just a book, but at the time it was way more than that to me, and it started my book collection. Anyway, yesterday was November 10th, 2025, and I, thought back and went, oh my God, it's been a decade. I'm going to do the reread right around the anniversary of the series completion. Recently, I went on Thrift Books to get first edition copies of everything because I wanted everything to match Winter. I do think the new covers are very beautiful, but there's a nostalgia to these. I was going to film this clip yesterday because it was the actual anniversary, right? And then I was tired because I got home from work and went, oh, I'm actually going to crash. And then I crashed. And then I was like, you know what? I'll just get a head start on this reread because I wanted to start it this week. Yesterday was Monday. I'll just start it on Monday, and then I'll come back and make this clip today, and then we'll continue. I finished the book. I finished Cinder this morning. This is why we're filming in the afternoon, because I woke up this morning and I could not put it down. This book had me by the throat. Yet again, I'm actually also 70 pages into Scarlet already. Cinder, I recently finished it, like I said, this morning. There's a few things that I noticed that I definitely suspended my disbelief more for when I was a child. The first being, why did they invite the entire city of New Beijing to the palace for the festival? The palace is big, I assume, but can they fit? They can't fit the whole city there. And also, isn't that a security issue? And like, obviously we're trying to get Adri, the evil stepmom and the evil stepsisters, right? We're trying to get them to the palace for the big coronation ceremony and ball, you know, because it's a retelling of Cinderella. But I just kept thinking, I was like, they couldn't be these poor family members that were like a friend of a friend of a friend that are loosely connected to Kai's mother's side of the family or something. Like, there could have been some like weird convoluted connection there, which would have also made it make more sense why Kai just from the jump, from the get-go, trusted Cinder with his very precious android with top secret information. He doesn't call her to the palace. He doesn't like monitor her fixing the android. He just gives it to her and is like, yeah, I'll come back in a week. Like, girl, this has top secret information. You don't know who she lives with. You don't know who she is. You don't know how trustworthy she is. You don't know if she's going to sell this information to anybody. You don't know any of that. Like, obviously she probably wouldn't sell it to the Lunars because everyone on Earth kind of hates them. But like, you know, she could still sell it to an enemy. She could still like use this information against him for money. Like, he doesn't know who she is or what she's motivated by. And like, the thing is, on that end of things, I think I can suspend my disbelief a little bit for him, because I think his like character arc is meant to be like he's a naive kid who has to take on the role of being an emperor way too young and way too early, and he has to like learn all these hard lessons because him trusting Cinder so immediately and openly does kind of bite him in the ass. So it makes sense, I guess, for like his character arc. That's the point. I can let that go. But like, the inviting everybody to the ball is weird to me. Like I said, I feel like there could have been a very loose family tie there. Like, maybe he invites the Lins because he's having Cinder help with the robot and they don't even realize. I don't know, like there could have been a loose tie there to make that make a little more sense than inviting the entire city to the palace for the festival. But that's a very small issue. The book leans more heavily, I think, on its coming of age themes than on its dystopian ones. I thought it was a dystopia when I first picked it up when I was a teenager. This more so is a story about growing up. Kai and Cinder are two children, obviously, thrown into a world full of political unrest and turmoil that they're forced to deal with and contend with far before they feel ready. This book feels less like it's supposed to be making a big sweeping statement about society and how it functions, and more so it's making a smaller statement about growing up in a world that has these things. Cinder has experienced discrimination as a cyborg. Kai is naive and he's been sheltered a little bit too much in the palace, and they're thrust into a world where they're forced to make very large decisions, very important decisions. He feels he's too young, he's too naive, he's not ready. It's his father's job. His father has passed the mantle too soon, but he didn't get a choice. Cinder has been parentified essentially as a child. She's been forced to take care of her family since she was far too young in age, and has dealt with so much discrimination to the point of where she doesn't really care to change the world that she lives in. She's just trying to get out of it. These are things I think that kids can relate to, and they're definitely things that I related to a lot as a teenager. Cinder wasn't trying to marry the prince and have a perfect life. She fantasized a little bit about it, and I like that that's acknowledged. It's like, you can be a girl who doesn't center the idea of getting with a man or dating in general and still value it. And she's like, in a different life, probably it would be fun. She's in a bad family situation, which is obviously one of the main draws of Cinderella, is this like idea of being saved by love. And Cinder doesn't need to be saved by love. In fact, her getting tangled up with the prince ruins most of her plans. I think that this book, as an allegory for growing up, I think that makes it a more valuable book and a more interesting book. It's not trying to tackle every single issue we have in our society. It's throwing a teenager who doesn't know how to tackle every single issue in society and giving them a rudimentary understanding of those issues in society, and now telling that teenager, now deal with it. Now be an adult. Grow the fuck up. And it was very valuable to me at a very pivotal age. Like, I was, again, 14 or 15 when I read this. I probably couldn't have put words to it at the time, but I definitely think it saw me. There's always a big scared question mark over the future for me growing up, and seeing characters go through similar feelings in a completely different environment really helped, I think, cope. This book changed my brain chemistry a little bit, because I finally felt like there was a female main character that was like me. When Cinder, she can't express her emotions, so her emotions always come second. Like I said, as a girl who couldn't express her emotions as openly as other girls, who felt boyish for it, who felt boyish for having a muscled physique, who felt boyish because she was tall, watching Cinder go through all of those same insecurities and still finding love within the prince of all people despite all of that, it was very, very valuable to me. And I think that Cinder as a character is very, very valuable valuable to me. You know, there's a lot of great characters in these books, and each book kind of does increase in quality. This book isn't super high quality writing. It's super fast paced. That's why I finished it so quickly. You know, it's a very one-off world building. It's like, yeah, there's a big war and now every continent is a nation. Just to make it simple, Canada, Mexico, and the USA somehow came to an agreement and now they're one country. Every Asian country is now just under the Commonwealth. There's no uprisings. Cultures have been completely erased. We have like a weird mixture of like Chinese and Japanese culture in the Commonwealth, and I think that like those things are worthy of critique, and I even will critique those. Is the Eastern Commonwealth meant to be China? It's not China, it's Asia, but like Asia has a lot of different cultures all across the entire continent. How do we mix all those cultures? Are people okay with having their culture not being front and center anymore? Like, there's a lot of cultural clashes within the Asian continent that it's really hard to suspend your disbelief that the Asian continent is just all one country now. And on one hand, it's like it does simplify the world building to really make the characters stand out, which I think is a valid way to write a book. It's also not the best world building. It has a great atmosphere, has a great vibe. I like that it doesn't rely on fantasy and magic for everything. Like, the characters have to solve their own problems. The reason there's like air quotes magic in the story, it's like explained as like a bioelectrical way to control people's minds, which is how like sharks hunt, I guess. So it is drawn from science. I'm a much bigger science fiction girly than I am fantasy girly. A freaking cyborg that is a mechanic, that's cool as shit. And that was cool as shit to me as a teenager. Are you kidding me? I still thought it was cool as shit. I plowed through this thing. I put in my Goodreads review that reading this book was like having a conversation with my younger self and getting to watch her figure out her insecurities and figure herself out, but being on the other side of all the horrible things that happened to you as a teenager, and like knowing that it'll be okay. Teenage me was, you know, not usually in a good headspace, and being on the other side, and like my headspace isn't perfect. It's not great even, but knowing that I came in on the other side and I didn't get everything I ever wanted, but I'm in a better place. I've been telling my friends a lot, like since entering my mid-20s, it's the first time I'm like comfortable with being an adult. I've never been comfortable with growing up and being an adult. I've always tried to stay as young as possible, as long as possible, even before it became cool on TikTok. Comfortable sharing that I'm a reader online. Like, I never even talked about being a reader in real life. I felt judged. I felt like I was weird. I was always scared of being seen as nerdy. I thought that people would make fun of me. And in 10 years from now, when I'm in my 30s, I'm going to look back at 20-year-old me and go like, damn, it will be okay as well. It puts some things like that into perspective, I think, for like me specifically. Obviously, it's just a book. This morning, I finished Cinder, and I forgot that Thorn wasn't introduced to book 2, but I did start reading Scarlet. I'm about 70 pages in. I am using the jacket as a bookmark. I don't take as good of care of my books as my friend did. I was going to do more reading today, but I do need to get other stuff done today. I have some commissioned work I need to get done today. I need to get to editing my little free library video because I'm behind. And then I also need to get some writing done for November novel writing challenge, or whatever the people are calling it now. I'll do an update when I finish Scarlet. So I just finished reading Scarlet, and I do have to say that I'm not as attached to this book and these characters as much as I was with Cinder. Scarlet is a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. Basically, it follows Scarlet, who lives with her grandmother, and her grandmother gets kidnapped, and now she is looking for her grandmother. It's like, where did she go? I know that there's something sinister afoot, and then she meets a honking, mysterious man who is like, he has to duck when he goes to doorways, and doorways are like 6'8", I think. So this man is almost 7 feet tall, hulking, muscles, piercing green eyes. He's like, oh my god, who is this man? But also, like, he's dangerous. The two of them end up embarking on this journey to find her grandmother. But this man, who is aptly named Wolf, is harboring secrets. And as the story goes on, those secrets are revealed. I did catch myself in the same pattern as I was when I was 15 reading it, in that I was like looking forward to see which chapters were Cinder's chapters, because I was much more interested as a young child, and I guess as an adult, in Cinder and Thorn, because Cinder and Thorn are running away from the government. She is hiding from literally every person in existence, and she has one of the most recognizable faces ever. Her face is everywhere. They have a really exciting plot. You don't really know where it's going. You don't know how Cinder's going to get out of the situation. Captain Carswell Thorn is a new character introduced in this book. He helps Cinder escape prison. Actually, he doesn't really do shit. She kind of does all the work, and then he has a spaceship. The friendship between Cinder and Thorn is one of my like favorite pieces of these books. And I noticed that a really cool tick of Thorn's character that I guess I didn't catch the first time around, or just wasn't like looking for, is that he is really, really quick to blame the abuser, if that makes sense. Cinder takes into consideration, she goes, everything is my fault. Like, Cinder is really internal. She blames herself for a lot of what's going on in the world, because she's like, why would all these people do all these things to save me? She feels immense guilt that like people literally are putting their lives on the line just for little old her, right? And Thorn, you know, very straightforward, would be like, it's not your fault. Lavanna killed those people, and she could have just not done that, and you don't take credit for her horribleness, right? Thorn is the type of character who's like, no, that person who is hurting you, it's not your fault that they're hurting you. What else was I gonna say about this book? Oh, the wolf shit. Like, this book is so crazy to read in 2025 after like the alpha male, like Andrew Tate, and also like the way the alpha wolf thing has been disproven. All that, and like they do lean into like the alpha wolves and the omegas and the betas. It's so like the wolf hierarchy, which is it's so cringy. And then there's like a moment where like they do use the word mate in this book, and it makes me want to gouge my eyes out. I was like, no, we can't do that. But Scarlet and Wolf have a far more romantic book, I think, than Cinder's book. This book literally takes place over the span of like a day, which is crazy to me. Like, my original rating of this book back when I read it for the first time was 4 stars, whereas all the other books got 5. And reading it again, I can appreciate the characters, but like the technology introduced in this one is cool. Like the way that it kind of expands in the world is cool. Connects the Little Red Riding Hood to Cinderella because of the Lost Princess storyline, and they're just kind of starting to connect some of those dots. Like, I like Scarlet. She gives really great big sister energy for like Cinder and Thorn a little bit. Her and Wolf are cringy as hell, but like, you know what, we all know that one couple, and like they're both still people outside the relationship. That's something that I guess annoyed me with like ACOTAR, for example, is there's so many books with romance in them where the characters, once they're together, they are a unit and there's no like individual characterization. It's the least exciting in my opinion. The main thing that really makes this one less fun is like, we know all of the mysteries that Wolf and Scarlet are trying to uncover. And because in the first book we're revealed the super soldiers, we also know that Scarlet's grandmother was housing Princess Celine, and that had to be why she got kidnapped. Like, Scarlet is slowly learning all of these things, but we as the reader already know them, so having to go through a novel and try to rediscover these things from the perspective of a new character is like okay. And it really ramps up Kai's stakes as well, because he is this like new young emperor, and he's just watching the world fall apart, and he knows he's being manipulated, and he's like, what else am I supposed to do? And the one person that he like cared about a little bit and like was opening up to is a fugitive of the law. The other thing too that I was kind of like weird about is Scarlett's a really forgiving person. She's very understanding, and she's almost understanding to a fault, I want to say. Scarlet and Wolf kind of fight a lot. They go back and forth where he's like, I lied, and she's like, how dare you lie to me, I hate you. And then he's like, I'm sorry, I lied. And she's like, well, since you say I'm sorry, like, girl. I read about 100 pages of Cress. I'm going to try and get around to it tonight after everything, but I have plans tonight, and I have to open in the morning, so I'm not going to have like a lot of time to read, probably until tomorrow, honestly, unless I can get all my work done in like a timely manner. But it's already, yeah, it's 1 o'clock. There's no way I'm going to get everything done in time to get more reading done, which is annoying because I really want to read the book. I'm going to go, and then we will catch up after I have finished Cress.
So I decided that I was going to just wrap everything up all at once at the end instead of going book by book, mostly because I live a very busy and very interesting life. Just kidding, it's just busy. I usually do a little more practice before I turn on the camera for these kinds of things, but I really just wasn't feeling that today. I think that I'm just going to kind of go off the cuff. I finished all the books at this point, and just thought we just do a whole rundown, a whole spiel, okay? Let's start off with Cress. This book, when I think about reviewing it or wanting to talk about it, the main thing that comes to mind is just that it's longer. Cinder and Scarlet really feel more like introductory books. Cinder introduces us to the main character of the series that kind of governs the entire narrative. Then in the second book, Scarlet, we're introduced to more of the world. We up the stakes. We introduce more of the conflicts that's going on so that we really get to understand the empire and the regime that Cinder is really stepping into and forced to reckon with. What I appreciate about these books is the very subtle progression as it slowly ups the ante. Because in the first book, Cinder truly is just a simple girl living a simple girl life, and then she gets kind of caught up in this plot, gets kind of entangled into it, and there's all these different things that just keep compounding onto one another. The part of me that loved these books as a kid and is loving them as an adult is the fact that they are so tightly plotted. Every single book has a direction that it's going, and everything that happens in the book feels like it has to happen. Like, it doesn't feel like anything is shoehorned in or forced in for the plot. I think there might have been a couple things here and there, but like looking back, they don't really stand out as glaring issues. Let's talk about Cress though. Cress is interesting because we start getting a lot of characters to follow. First book, obviously, is just Cinder. We are introduced to a lot of the major villains. It's just her stepmom that's the main villain. Lavanna is like this big, scary other villain, but she is other to Cinder. She doesn't really exist in Cinder's world yet. But then by the second book, Lavanna does exist in Cinder's world. Then in Cress, we are more intimate, I want to say, with the Lunar people, because Cress is lunar. She's a shell, so we get more introduced to that sort of aspect to the Lunar people and like how they work. And we also kind of find out how Lavanna has eyes in the sky, because there's this ongoing sort of myth that Lavanna knows everything. Even if you think about her, she knows what you're thinking. We're introduced to this adorable hacker she knows everything and like spends her entire life staring at the screen. It does still have the fairy tale element with Thorn coming in and saving her. What I found most conversational about this book is the relationship, obviously. I think that these books, they do lean pretty heavily into their romantic relationships. Cress and Thorn as a romantic relationship, when I was a teenager, it seemed very normal, admirable even. I like heavily shipped it as a teenager, and then as an adult, I'm reading it and I'm a little more uncomfortable, seeing as Cress is a 16-year-old girl who has literally never met another human being in her life other than the lady that's been abusing her the entirety of it. And 2, Thorn is 20 or so years old and has had plenty of romantic and sexual interactions. One of my least favorite romance tropes is like a hypersexual, very experienced womanizer type of man, and like the virginal, I've never even looked at a penis type, I've never even thought of a penis type of girl. And it even gets worse in my head when the man is also older than the girl, and then even worse when the man's an adult and the girl is a teenager. I think that this dynamic outside of the narrative is something that's icky. I said it really good in my review, so I'm just going to read off my phone. As an adult, Cress and Thorn have an uncomfortable age gap. That could have been different. Like, Meyer could have aged her up or aged him down. It really wouldn't affect the narrative too much. I was thinking about this actually. I was thinking that Cress being aged up by like 2 years. She could have been 18. That still would have worked in like the grand scheme of the story. And Thorn could have been 19 as well. He was an army deserter. People joined the army at 18. He could have deserted less than a year ago. Like, it still could have worked for their ages, him to be a little younger, her to be a little older, one of the two, to kind of make it seem plausible. The only thing is Thorn kind of does have to be an adult in order for his story to work out. But Cress didn't need to be so young. I think that was kind of a strange choice on Meyer's part, considering these books are marketed towards people between the ages of like 15 to 18, right? It would have been difficult if he more so over exaggerated his ability to get girls. So I was saying here, like, if he talks a big talk but doesn't really have the game to back it up, which could have been canon but isn't exactly implied. But this dynamic just has always rubbed me the wrong way in books marketed at teenage girls. I adored Cresswell as a teenager, but Dr. Erlin's disapproval makes sense contextually. That being said, Meyer does create 2 characters in them that are genuine and sweet, all without reducing Cress to nothing more than a damsel. She sees herself as one, sure. This is a story of her realizing her strength and growing in confidence as part of the crew. Thorn has always been a bit dodgy, but wants to be the man Cress sees him as, which I had to emphasize in my review. I was like, this is very fictional. Can't change him. You can't change him. That's only his choice. This book really does like give the you can change him narrative, which I'm not a huge fan of. I am a major advocate for you should never, ever, 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 ever. I'm gonna come really, really close when I say this. You should never, ever, ever enter a relationship because you think you can change the person. They will change for themselves or they won't. Don't think that your love can change them. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Love cannot change a person. That is an internal decision, okay? You can't love toxicity out of somebody. That's something, if we're going to take any major lesson from this book has that happen, and that it's more fun in a narrative sense, but it is not real life. Anyway, I feel like I have to say that simply because it's marketed to teenagers. And I feel like if I don't say it, I'm doing the world a disservice.
I think that like that the way their characters are constructed and written from a technical perspective, it works, and that's why they're so shippable. But I think that like we can't just go around and ignore that power dynamic. And I think the other major point I wanted to make is just talking about Cress herself. I think she's a really interesting character because she sees herself as a damsel. She's like, I have to be saved. I need my Prince Charming to save me. And she realizes throughout the narrative that she's perfectly capable of saving herself. So sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of help and to have somebody show that they show up and care about you. I think that's something that's more of what she needed as a character. Is she didn't need somebody to save her. She needed someone to show up for her. Being able to mix that with the damsel narrative is something that is, I think, very important. I think that a lot of girls kind of idealize or romanticize the idea of being a damsel or somebody that needs to be saved, because it's not that they actually need to be saved. They're a perfectly capable person and they just lack confidence and maybe need someone to show up, show them that they matter and that they're cared about. I think that Cress's story is a really great story about that. She is this meek, tiny, very shy person who's really, really good with computers. She's very, very confident, and I love that she doesn't ever brag about it. She's like, yeah, I guess. She's like, all I gotta do is this, and this. Like she's humble in her skills, even though she deserves to brag. A girl can brag every once in a while. It's not a big deal. And I think that having her come into herself and grow in her confidence and recognize that she has a bunch of friends and people do care about her and she is a cool person and she is somebody who is more than a tool to be used by the Empire. I think that that's a really very human story, and it just makes that story really, really enjoyable. And it grounds this very big, we got to overthrow the Empire type of plot. And of course, we have all the other characters going on in this book. Like I said, this book gives us like a whole slew of characters to follow and root for. Namely, I think that Cinder is coming into herself. She is like, she's the protagonist of the series, so she's going to have a lot to say and a lot to do. And we really get to see her coming into her own and be a leader. She goes from somebody who doesn't really accept it. She's really much in denial in like those first couple of books. But by this book, she's accepted it and she's really working on herself and trying to accept the role that has been sort of thrust upon her. We get to meet Jason a little bit more. He has more dialogue, and something I did notice as well was that because there's so many characters, Scarlet is kind of tossed aside at one point. She gets kidnapped, and so as a character, she's pretty much tossed aside until like middle end of winter. And I think that out of all the characters, she's the least interesting and dynamic. While she has Little Red Riding Hood, she doesn't really have a lot to do with like the overarching story that's going on. Winter is directly connected to Lavanna, Cinder is directly connected to Lavanna, and Cress is also directly connected to Lavanna. They all have a like personal vendetta, whereas Scarlet just kind of like is a farm girl who just wants to live on her farm in peace. But anyway, she gets kidnapped and kind of tossed to the side for most of the narrative, so that's a little bit frustrating, but it does give Wolf a little more character development. He kind of always felt like a very flat character, so him getting that little bit of having to exist without Scarlet, I think, is good for his character, despite his character still not being that interesting. Sorry, I'm not a big fan of the Scarlet and Wolf characters. After Cress, I obviously read Fairest. I reread this book and said, actually, I am an advocate for reading Fairest. And I think that reading it between Cress and Winter does give it an interesting sort of feel, because I think that we're getting this huge buildup and there's a ton of momentum being built to the end of Cress. Then we kidnap the prince. Cress has a very, very massive climax. And then we stop for a second and we read Fairest. Fairest has no chapters. It is just a bunch of scenes put together into a very short novella about our villain, Lavanna. And I wrote a very long review about this. I want to read a couple portions because Lavanna's story is interesting to me. The first thing I noticed that was interesting is the scars that she has that she hides. I found myself reading it kind of hoping that they would be revealed that they really weren't that bad. And like this being a certain, I feel like it could have been a really interesting commentary on women's beauty standards and how even though her body is like not that bad, she was still striving for perfection, and like the certain lengths that she's going towards kind of border on insanity, and like how reaching for the certain beauty standards that women are held to does feel like insanity. For myself, an example is I don't really wear makeup anymore. It's something I did most of my life. Like as a teenager, I wore a ton of makeup. I wouldn't leave the house without it. And I realized as I cleared up my skin and became an adult, I don't like wearing it. I've sweat underneath it a lot. I get pimples when I have it. I end up rubbing it off because I like to itch my eyes. Like, I don't know, like I get really uncomfortable in makeup and it feels like a performance. And like, I feel like I can't be myself, or that I have to be high maintenance if I'm always wearing makeup or always have my hair done or something. I don't know, like sometimes doing all of the different little things to be anti-aging and to make your skin perfect and to make your hair look perfect and to make your body thinner and to make, but also still pretty strong, but you also want to be able to look this way, and then you have to have the perfect abs. We also have the perfect boobs, and you have to have the perfect, everything is so meticulous that it does border on insanity. And like the minute you stop caring so much about that kind of stuff, you don't feel like you're losing your mind every time you look in the mirror, every time you do your hair. And I think that Lavanna could have had a very interesting exploration of the insanity that we have to go to look a certain way. This came out in like the 20-teens. Social media was a thing. Girl, we're all wearing the freaking Instagram eyebrows and the Instagram contouring, but obviously she does have real scars. And I think that we border on this narrative of like ugly women are evil that I think is a little bit problematic, but I also think that Levana is a fully realized character. I'm going to read this part from my review because I said it best, okay? Reading about Levana forcing herself on Everett was way more uncomfortable this go around as well, but it does show her character, how she'll take what she believes she deserves. However, while I want to acknowledge that Levana was the in this situation, I do think that it can be dangerous for real life victims to popularize stories where the teenaged girl is the perpetrator and not the adult man. Everett's fears of false accusations are founded, sure, but in real life, teenage girls rarely have the upper hand in a dynamic like theirs. Levana is royalty with mind control powers, not something teenagers can normally do. The big piece that really stood out to me in this book that I found kind of disturbing was Levana is a 15, 16-year-old girl, I don't remember how old she was, and Everett is a 25-year-old man. In the dynamic, she has mind control powers, she is the royal princess, and everybody in that palace works for her except for her sister, right? And then Everett is a lowly palace guard. So everything he does and says is put under scrutiny, and anything happens between him and Levana that Levana decides isn't good, off with his head, right? I think that her forcing herself on him and forcing him to love her is a really interesting indication of her character, sure, but it also does perpetrate this idea that teenage girls can have the power in a dynamic like that. A teenage girl heavily flirting with an adult man does not give the adult man a pass to a said teenage girl. And again, I think that this book is a very specific situation, and it only works within the context of this story, and it still does explore an abuse of power, which I do think is still interesting, and I think that it is nuanced. And one of the biggest things I liked about this novella in exploring Levana is that it explores a very nuanced and almost empathetic villain. I get where she's coming from, but like, girl, I said here, Levana abuses her power, and her goals are so tangible as she wants love, power, and what's best for her lunar people. And she'll go so far as to control them in order to get the outcome she wants. Her tyranny comes from a love of her home, and her story shows how good intention can lead a ruler to down a villainous path. I'm tempted to make the comparison Shirin J. Zhao's Heavenly Tyrant, which tries to explore this idea as well. Qin Zhang has good policies and ideas, but oppresses the people in order to see them through. Where Heavenly Tyrant is clunky in its execution, this one I think explores that idea a little more cleanly. Levana is a taker, right? She takes the man she wants. She takes the crown away. She slowly dips her toes into all these bad things that feed into her worst delusions, and then she like sees how it tastes, and she's like, ooh, actually there's no consequences to my actions. If I make this man love me, he can't do anything about it. If I murder this child and take the crown, if it looks enough like an accident, people aren't going to question my authority. Every time she like does something a little bit bad, she ends up on top, and then she's able to validate it in her head. I'm doing what's best for the lunar people. I'm doing what's best for Everett. It's for the good of Luna. She can be a better mother to Winter because she makes Winter a princess. Celine needs to die because she'll turn out just like her sister Shannery, who sucks, by the way. She has good intent, but she ends up becoming way too controlling about it, which is what turns her into a tyrant. I say the book provides explanation for Levana's actions, but does not excuse them. She's never been loved before, but she turns it into something grotesque, like an incel who feels scorned by women and therefore hates them for it. Maybe if she had felt loved by one person, she would have turned out better, but Levana's choices are still her own. Cinder felt as alone and unloved as ever, but she didn't turn out like her aunt. I think this is an interesting little novella to give some insight into the big bad villain. It humanizes her instead of making her some vague evil entity. I feel a series can only be as good as its villains, and which is one of my main gripes with a lot of modern books, is I feel like a lot of villains just they lack in nuance. One of the biggest examples I love to use of this is the King of Hybern from the Akatar series. What is his motivation? He's not a person, he's not a character. There's no intricate backstory that shows how he rose to villainy, how he turned into a villain, why he craves this power, why he craves the things that he does. He's just there as this very vague evil entity, so you don't feel his presence on the page. Like I said, a series is really only as good as its villain. If we have a deep, interesting, and almost human villain, someone that we can practically empathize with, that I think is what's going to make a much more interesting story, especially considering the little comparison I made too is Cinder and Levana have very, very comparable lived experiences. She could have said, I'm Celine, bitch, and start controlling people's minds to get herself onto Luna, but she didn't want to be that person, and she wanted to be a good person and potentially a good queen. And I think that comparison between the two is what makes the hero-villain dynamic of those two characters fascinating. And that's that. Levana, villain arc, okay? Which leads us into winter. Happy winter. It's winter right now. I didn't realize how much longer this book was than the other ones. This one is 800 pages, but we start out the story pretty strong. We meet Winter, and like all of Luna, we immediately fall in love with her. Her voice in the book is so strong, and I found myself almost admiring how Meyer can juggle her delusional fits and her real life, because Winter isn't crazy. She calls herself crazy. Everybody calls it the lunar sickness, that she's crazy, that she's insane. But when we're in her head and when all the other characters are interacting with her, a couple of them, like Scarlet and Jason, do affectionately call her crazy, but they have an intrinsic sort of understanding that she's not crazy. You know, she sees things that aren't there because she refuses to use her power to like hurt anybody. I think sometimes too, when writing scenes where a character is kind of not seeing real life, isn't really perceiving things well, is kind of in a bad mental space, it can be really hard to make the story continue forward without being confusing. And I think that this book it's not confusing. We know what's real and what's fake in the same vein that Winter does. Some of her memories she's not entirely certain about, and sometimes she's not entirely certain about a lot of other things as well. But because of the way the narrative is framed, we do understand that like if things are being frozen over or things are a little more metaphorical, that's usually how Winter's brain tends to think. She calls her heart her blood platelet factory. Things like that where it's not exactly sane. It's interesting that I say that out loud now because I'm making the mental comparison to the book Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. I recently read that book like a week ago or something. And in that book, the main character, Natsuki, has been abused as a child, and she compartmentalizes the way that the world works similarly to Winter almost, and like she calls the world and a world around her the baby factory. Everybody just has to like fall in love and produce babies. That's earthling brainwashing. That's not how her brain works. She's an alien from an alien planet, but they're trying to convince her that she's not. And it's interesting that like Winter's inner monologue is somewhat similar but a bit more like approachable for like a younger audience, I would say. I'm making an interesting comparison because I think that Winter growing up in that castle around Lavana can't have had the best childhood possible. We don't know everything that happened, and like I don't want to imply that she was abused as a child similarly to Natsuki in Earthlings, but I do think that like if we go through immense amounts of abuse or trauma as a child, we can have that sort of like metaphorical thinking and the compartmentalization of separating ourselves from our own lived experiences. And I think that Winter's hallucinations do feel a little bit like that aspect in more gritty adult literary fiction. And then going with that, Winter as a character, I've already kind of shit on modern publishing a little bit with Lavana, but I want to shit on modern publishing a little bit again because Winter throughout the book is selfless and she's kind, and the book rarely calls attention to it. It just has Winter do things that are selfless and kind. And I think that I've run into a lot of issues with a lot of books that have been published in recent years where it's like she's the kindest, most giving person that we've all ever met, and I, main character girl, I'm special, I'm so nice and I'm so kind and I'm so selfless. And it's like, okay, but like the only times we ever hear about you being kind or selfless is when you're telling us your backstory. Like do something in the modern day that is selfless. I dare you. In this book, we finally get to deal directly with Lavana. She's the major villain of the series, and she's also Winter's personal antagonist, the evil queen Snow White, who would sooner kill a child than cede her throne. Getting to see them directly interact and witnessing Winter's perspective on her added a really fun new layer to the story. Between Winter being her charismatic self and Cinder threatening to overthrow her, Lavana is caught in a maelstrom of confusion that she can barely control. Lavana, and she's like, oh my god, teenagers everywhere. And then obviously this book is going to have a romantic arc, and I think that I liked that this one, unlike the original Snow White story wherein Snow White is saved by the guard because the guard finds her to be the fairest in all the land, in this one the guard is also the love interest. I think it's probably not the first time this has been done before, but I was appreciating it while I was reading the book because we get to see Winter and Jason grow up together a little bit back in like their flashbacks, and they have a very sweet friendship. And I think that sometimes the friends to lovers cannot work because it just kind of feels like, you know, we're friends and friendship isn't as valuable as a relationship, so we have to get into a romantic relationship. But there's just something about their friendship where I was like, it kind of has always been romantic ever since they were children, and it just kind of matures as they grow up and mature with it. I said here that like while some friends to lovers types dynamics deal with doubt and betrayal, I found that neither character really doubted the other. It was almost secure knowing they loved one another, no matter if it meant Jason could protect Winter from harm as a guard or be as close to her as he wished. There's a beautiful tenderness between them that can only come with knowing each other so well. That's where the friends to lovers like trope really work. The lighting is drastically changing and we're running out of daylight. It's like really not until Jason is asked to kill her, as per the Snow White story goes, well, if I'm gonna die now, might as well give you a smooch. You know what I mean? Anyway, I think that instead of going too in depth into like the plot decisions and like the writing decisions, I do want to just talk about the series as a whole, because I have it here on my like a Goodreads review that I really went like I listed through how each character really gets to realize their arc, because like each character within the story has a bone to pick with Lavana for different reasons. I mentioned Wolf because Wolf has a pretty devastating transformation in this book physically. A couple things I mentioned too is like Kai has more agency in this book. He kind of is like a side character for a lot of the series, but in this one he actually gets to engage with the plot to take down Lavana. He helps a little bit here and there, but he, you know, obviously is just kind of like He's just a prince or an emperor, and he can't really go anywhere or do anything, so he kind of does what he can. And when he gets the opportunity to really stand up for himself, he does take that opportunity. Cress is a bad bitch, and I love her. She shows up, and she doesn't give a fuck, right? Like, she's more confident. I said here that Cress used her voice loud and clear. We have Thorn, who finally got to be vulnerable. Like, this man is never vulnerable. This man is always has a joke locked and loaded, right? So he finally is vulnerable and is realistic. And I think that watching him in Cress's relationship, like I said in the earlier segment where I was talking about the book, I think from a narrative character perspective, it does grow in a really nice and satisfying way. This series is so special to me in that it has 5 unique female characters, each with agency and a fully realized arc. And as much as we want to say problematic behavior in fiction is fine because it's fiction, it's also much more satisfying to see women characterized well to young and impressionable girls. It's not that hard, and I think the series shines in that it not only characterizes them well, it shows them characterized well and worthy of love. You don't need to make yourself smaller or stupider or more vulnerable to be worthy of a man's love. There are 5 distinct and powerful female characters that are given center stage in the story. The story isn't about their love interests. I've been doing a deep dive into romantasy recently, and the biggest thing I've been kind of annoyed with the genre as a whole is it surrounds the fucking men. It's what man do you want to be your book boyfriend? What man do you want to fall in love with? What man do you want to say the right things to? What man do you want to pretend to fuck you? That's what these books seem to be about. Why am I reading that? If I wanted to read a book about a man, I could literally pick up any popular fantasy story from the beginning of fantasy to 10 years ago. Every single one is about a man. And these stories, although very romantic, each lead, except for Aiko, I'm so sorry, each lead gets their own love interest that is written for them, alongside them, and it's not about the love interest. They are actively pursuing their own goals. The love interest is also just there, and he is helping them along the way, and he has his own personal motivations. There's different relationships and dynamics between the non-romantic characters as well that doesn't suggest competition either. And I think that these are books that have a very strong romantic through line that are about the women. I always want to talk about Cinder too with these books because I think that she was the character I related to the most when I read them for the first time, considering I was 16. Cinder was 16. I think that I had a lot of similar personality traits to her in that I never felt comfortable in girly, frilly anything. I always felt like I was going to get it dirty. I was going to spill something on it. Obviously, I think with the pick me thing, we toe that line very closely of girls who just aren't very girly and girls who are pick me's. And I think that a lot of times we're trying to represent a girl that doesn't follow the traditional feminine and try to make her lovable, but we end up in pick me territory. I don't need to wear dresses. I just want to wear pants, but then they're perfect in a dress. I'm reading the Hurricane Wars right now, and it's that same fucking shit where it's I just am more comfortable in a humble tunic and pants. Put me in a dress and I don't even know what to do with myself, but she still looks perfect. Whereas every time you put Cinder in a dress, this girl doesn't know what the fuck to do with herself. She stains it every single time. She always messes up her own hair because her hair she doesn't know how to take care of it, and it just stays unruly. It's always just up and out of her face. Like I said, I related to her a lot, and I think that the biggest piece of her story that I think really that I connected with so much was that she never had to turn girly to be considered lovable. She never had to turn girly to be considered a good princess or a good queen or to be worthy of her title or worthy of her lineage. She never had to turn into a girly girl in order to be worthy of being Kai's girlfriend. She always just got to be herself. Kai also welcomed it. He was attracted to it. And those are things that I think, for example, in romantasy, since this is something I keep since this is something that I'm been really, really into lately, is this idea that these girls, despite being tomboys who prefer pants, these men see them in their perfect dresses and their beautiful hair and their perfect makeup, and then they're oh my god, it's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. But it's why don't we get that big reveal of, oh my god, that's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, when she looks how she prefers to look. The dress should be stunning, sure, but with Kai and Cinder, he initially thought she was cute and interesting when she was dressed like a mechanic, when she had gloves and grease stains all over herself. She showed up to his party in a dress covered in grease stains, and he was damn, that's the one. And I think that that's something that's more charming and more romantic long term, rather than pushing this idea that girls need to be tiny and feminine and pretty and gussied up every second of every day in order to earn the love of whatever MMC that they want. So there's a couple little problematic things, and I think it's far from perfect. There is this very, very strong sense of womanhood throughout the entire series. Getting to see all the different angles and sides of women that can exist, and even though there's more, I think, like I said before, I think the plotting is very tight. Despite there being 8 set. Nine main characters. You know every single one of them. They're all very distinct, and you understand where each of them is coming from. Feels very well edited, well planned. And this is something too that I think I've been seeing a conversation happening about online, is that like editing is just going down in books, and reading this back to back with like newer releases and like a similar genre is that like, yes, this is so much tighter. There's less fluff, where it doesn't feel like there's extra here or too not enough there, or like it feels like it's meant to be 4 books. That's the type of reading that I fell in love with when I was a teenager, and getting to re-fall in love with it again as an adult, I think is, it's healing my inner child. The main thing I'm trying to say is that I enjoyed my reread, and I think that these books are valuable. I have only ever read Marissa Meyer's other book, the one about the Queen of Hearts, and I didn't like it very much when I was a teenager, but I do kind of want to give her a little reread. I'm kind of rambling at this point, and I'm going to acknowledge too that I am biased. I read it as a teenager, connected with it as a teenager, loved it as a teenager. I feel very blessed that this is the media that I grew up with. I do sometimes feel a little sad that the media, because I've read YA recently. I don't know, sometimes I'm just sad that that's what we're getting now. Talking about these books specifically, their main strength, as I said, is their characterization of women. I think that the friendships between the characters is very well done. These books aren't immune to criticism. I think that they do deserve criticism in some places. Like I said, weird age gap relationships. There's like a weird disability rep. I don't think I'm very qualified to talk about that, but I know that some people have talked about it, and like it's a little bit strange. Doesn't make the most sense with like the cyborg thing. I think that sometimes not every aspect of a book needs to be done perfectly, because the message of the book wasn't like treat cyborgs with respect. It was about these kids coming of age in a fake world. They are dealing with real world issues, that them growing up and developing responsibilities and coming into themselves despite all of the hardship and unrest going on around them. The ending of Winter, I don't really like, actually. Cinder makes a government decision, which is just like, who's to say a Luner isn't gonna mind fuck a bunch of people in order to make them vote for them as a president? Like, that's kind of naive, I think, but she's also a teenager. Yeah, I reread, and they still hold up 10 years later. I'm still enjoying them. Like I said, they're not perfect, but I really don't think the perfect book exists because that wouldn't be art. That would be me being biased and not using my critical little tiny little brain. So that's that for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe, stick around. I do have some fun videos planned for next year that I can hopefully get done in a timely manner. Happy New Year. Thanks for coming around. Happy holidays. Turn on the notifications. Leave a little comment. I probably won't respond because comments make me nervous, but you can still leave it. I'll give you a little heart. That's it. Thank you so much for sitting through my long-winded yapping. I be yapping, girl. I be yapping.